Good afternoon. It's June 13th, I believe. Friday 16th of June. So today we're going to talk a bit about international fundraising. Mithril International is, we're based in Barbados, in the Caribbean. And being a small country, but connected, very much connected to the to the world. Of course, people are often surprised that how many flights there are in and out of a small place like Barbados. Lots of connections to London, to the U.S., Canada. Now Panama recently has come on board, which is really great. And the word international means a lot when when you're based in basically in a jurisdiction which is small, because to interact with friends, colleagues, family, we reckon, some people reckon that there are more Barbadians that live outside of Barbados than there are actually living in Barbados at the moment, and that probably is true if you take into account the UK, Canada, and New York alone. So international fundraising is something which, as an international tax advisor, it just keeps coming up again and again and again. And this is why we had to basically, even though, I am not we're not a venture capitalist, we're not broker dealers, we are not, we're not investment bankers, we don't, deploy or accumulate and deploy capital. So we're not involved in it directly that way. But of course, people set up structures, corporate and tax structures, which are by the very nature international, meaning involving more than one country, in order to access capital. Now, the reason why we have come into this is because Barbados is, we do a lot of business with people from Latin America, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, Argentina, Chile. Quite a lot of people from Latin America do stuff, one thing or another in Barbados. We've had good and increasing relations with diplomatic relations with all the countries in Latin America over time. And so, the question comes, like, how can we help? How can we help our clients? Because we see them struggling with international fundraising. So just a little bit of background. When you have family-owned businesses, owner-managed businesses, entrepreneurs who are in South America, generally speaking, what you find is that a lot of people who are doing projects that are less than $100 million, it's very difficult to get bank financing arranged for smaller projects. Of course, banks in Latin America like large corporate projects. So to the corporate and institutional people, you're welcome to listen to the problems of those of us who deal in smaller size deals and smaller size problems. You're more than welcome to stay with us and listen to the issues and the challenges that we have to deal with. But, we are not talking, banks in South America like to deal with, big chunky, more than $100 million of financing. It's very difficult to get a bank to help an entrepreneur, especially an owner-managed entrepreneur, to do a $50 million project or a $20 or a $30 or $15 million project. And the fact of the matter is that, of course, there are many projects, great projects, fantastic business people in South America and Africa and wherever else who, have great projects at 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 million. He would be getting up there. But even those, I've seen people struggle with those. And so, given that the venture capital and private equity, again, is more are less inclined to, they're less inclined to deal with smaller fundraising projects. That means that basically there's all these people who are in South America, Africa, various countries, and they're going international looking to fundraise, to access capital. And let's get to the bottom line. The United States is the number one place. It's very dynamic, given the way they do business and the way that they're set up and how they operate. We all know it's the most dynamic market for raising capital in the world. And we're talking now, again, I'm going to differentiate between the big institutional corporate stuff that we see in the news on Wall Street. I'm not talking about all the big ticket stuff that we read about in the media, all the fancy venture capital stuff and what have you. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the small, homegrown, small, owner-managed, small family business. And when I say small, to a working person, 10, 15, $20 million of money, of hard-earned money is a lot of money. So we're not talking about the big deals. We're talking about the family-owned, owner-managed deals, which are less than 100 million and 20 million. And so when people are coming now to the US, so if you're in Peru or you're in Colombia, and you want to access capital from investors in the US, accredited investors in the US, you are now international because you're looking at accessing capital in a different jurisdiction in which your business is based. You obviously have to take, these things into account. US people, what you will find out with US advisors, US investors, the US domestic market is massive and overwhelming, okay? So I'm gonna set that when you're international, you are not US domestic. A lot of people in the US, a lot of advisors, lawyers, tax lawyers, financial advisors, different people, they are all used to dealing with the US domestic market. A lot of them. Now, we all know, of course, that the US has massive amounts of international interaction, massive amounts of international investments and multinational brands and corporations. But again, I'm going to differentiate from those. Yes, those guys are out there doing all those international things, and that's reality. But I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the family-owned businesses who want to raise capital from investors in the US, and you're a small, less than $50 million, less than $100 million owner-managed or family-owned business. Now, as I said, a lot of advisors, employees, analysts, firms, accounting, law, broker-dealers, you name it. There are a lot of them in this space who would serve a family-owned or owner-managed business or do deals at 10, 12, $5 million. A lot of those people are obviously very, very busy doing a lot of domestic US business. And so the reason why I bring up these points is because domestic US business and all the structuring and the techniques and the tax structuring and the way that people go about doing things and all the stuff that we read about in American textbooks and tax law books and what have you, a lot of those methods and approaches that apply to US domestic fundraising are not directly applicable to international fundraising, because when you're international, the system though treats you very differently. There are a lot of different things that have to be taken into account when you're dealing with international fundraising. And we see people, of course, run into these difficulties all the time. It's always very difficult, as I've seen, for international businesses to raise capital, small international businesses to raise capital in the United States for a number of reasons. So one of the first things that I will say about raising capital in the US that we, the international people, have to realize, of course, fundraising, dealing with securities, And raising capital in the United States is there's one big overlay, one big principle that we in the international world have to get in our minds, which is this: introducers or finders for raising capital in the United States is a big no-no. Do not raise capital using introducers. What I mean by that is don't use finders, don't arrange. You cannot arrange with someone in the US unless they're a regulated person, like a bank, a broker dealer, regulated broker dealer that does such. Unless that person is a regulated person, you cannot basically pay them a commission to raise capital for you. You cannot do that. So it's really important that you don't try to use finders. Don't use finders. If you do go to the US talking to people in your network and you do use finders, a number of things can happen. Either people will see that you're doing that and they will just quietly not say anything or walk away from you and your deal. Everyone, all the broker dealers and the investment advisors here, all these people, they know the score. So they know if they come across you. Even if you do manage to find some high net worth accredited investors who are interested in your deal, and you are, talking about working through finders and getting introduced to introducers and paying introducers commissions, if and when people find out, either they themselves or their advisors or someone is basically going to realize that you are not, you're not really doing things the right way, and that this, could end up in basically a mess. Because when you raise capital in the US, when you use finders and introducers, it's highly possible for investors to take you to court, get their money back, and then of course the SEC can, if they find out that you're doing this, they can take action against you. And I won't spell out the litigation, but it's not nice. So you can basically end up with almost criminal liability for going that way. So if you're a family or a managed business, unlike a multinational, where multinationals, when they break laws or make mistakes, they get fined. Maybe some junior manager gets fired. But for owner managers and family-owned businesses, remember, the buck stops with you. If you are not a multinational and it's clear that you are the majority beneficial owner of a business, or a small number of you, and you get involved in breaking the laws in the US, raising capital using finders, introducers, you're going to create potentially a lot of liability for yourselves. Don't rely on what I'm saying. I'm not a US lawyer, even though I've studied US tax law for quite some time now. What I would suggest is that you can talk to any lawyer. Any US lawyer will tell you what the situation is on introducers and finders. And of course, using ChatGPT-4 or anything like that, you can search it. There are tons and tons of articles explaining why you shouldn't use introducers and finders, which are non-regulated persons, to raise capital in the US, that way, using introducers and finders for commissions. The only persons who can be paid commissions in the US are regulated broker dealers or regulated persons. So there's all different types of those, and you would have to be working. It was best to go and seek a US securities lawyer and talk to them and find out, if you don't know, then you can find out by talking to a US securities lawyer. We of course work, because of what all the international fundraising that our clients are doing, we work with a couple of US securities lawyers who we know well. And so that's the basis for, a lot of the things I'm saying here about introducers and finders. Okay, now that we've got that covered, the first thing I want to do is, let's talk about I'm just looking at my notes on the board here. Let's talk about the regulated financial system. The global financial system, as we all know, is divided into two. It's divided into the regulated financial system and the unregulated financial system. the people, the high net worth many high net worth investors, not all, but many high net worth investors who have accumulated lots of capital. If you're going after, say, if you're a private family owned or a managed business and you're trying to raise 10, $15 million and you want to raise capital from, say, 3-4 people, then of course you're looking for the type of investors who have, some accumulated capital and have the ability to either buy or invest at the level so that you only have a few high net worth investors to deal with, to work with. If that's the type of thing that you're looking for, then you have to take the regulated financial system into account, because those people, the majority of them have their funds, their assets, their portfolios are held in private banks. Private banks are, by banks, of course, are regulated, but the banks are the trust companies that oversee the wealth of these people are in private banks. Private banks can be big or they can be really small, but at the end of the day, they're regulated institutions. Regulated institutions, by their very nature, place a great emphasis on dealing with other regulated persons. That's what essentially a lot of private banks or other financial institutions are doing or try to do. They're basically, ideally, what they want to do is they ideally want to engage or interact, as in do business with other regulated entities, so that their compliance risks are low. Because of course, non-compliance for a regulated business like a private bank means that they can either be subject to fines or liability and suffer reputational risk. So they're highly incentivized to interact and deal with other regulated persons. And this is something that when you're doing international fundraising and you're dealing with, you want to talk to, investors in the US. This is one thing ultimately that you need to think through at the beginning, because ultimately the majority of these people have their funds, their trusts are all in highly regulated environments. And the people who are looking after their money, even though the investor might think you're great and want to invest with you, unless you are a regulated person, they will be a lot less likely to want to invest in your structure. And that's when I say they, I mean the compliance people who work for the private bank of your investor. So at the beginning, what you have to realize that, you can go ahead and talk to your your investors, you can agree everything. And of course, we're assuming here that you've done it the right way by using a regulated offering in the US, which we'll talk more about in the next videos, because this is really just laying out the broad approach for the first video. Let's say you're talking to your investors, you have to realize that you can agree everything with them, you're all happy, you've given them the documentation, you've given them the name of your US broker dealer and all the rest of it. And then of course what happens is, because your structure is an unregulated, privately owned structure, it's an international business as well, you've agreed with the investor, then he passes it over to his lawyer or tax lawyer or accountant or whatever. They raise their eyebrows when they see it's international. Now, you can come across one or two types of advisor to your investor. The advisors who are US persons are either going to be well-versed in international things and, are very comfortable and used to seeing international structures and investments. But then, alternatively, the US advisors might be people who, they're doing hundreds of millions of dollars of business within the domestic US. They don't and have never seen anything international, or they just don't do it. So a lot of US advisors said to me, well, why would I do international investment? What do I need to do that for? I can do any type of investment, generate any type of return right here, domestic in the US. I don't need to. I know the laws here. I don't have to expose myself to international things or whatever. And then what you find is then your investor begins to go cold or quiet, and then it's taking all this time, and then things go from bad to worse. And then ultimately all your expectations and plans are dashed because, the advisors, and then I haven't even gotten to the fact that when, let's say you get past the advisors and your investor says to his private bank, right, can you, arrange $5 million or 3 or 4 or $2 million down to, down to this company in the BVI, or down to this company in Chile, or down to this company wherever, Uruguay or wherever. And then, you'll get a silence for 2-3 days, and then the private bank compliance department comes back and tells the relationship manager at the private bank of the advisor and says to him, nope, we're not doing it. This is way too much risk, way too much high risk. The risk score is very high. We're not doing it. And then there comes hand wringing, and everybody's frustrated, and it's like, but why are we not, why can this not be done? And then the potential investors might be slightly embarrassed, or just says, look, this is too difficult, and go on with his life and not be answering your calls, and it all falls apart. We've seen this so many times. And so what you have to do is take these things, these are not problems these are problems that can be overcome. All I'm doing is laying out these problems here, and then saying to you that, if you take note of these things beforehand, and you plan for them beforehand, then basically you will be able to get past these issues. And each of these issues, these problems has solutions, and these are things that you can do yourselves by realizing what it's more what you need to realize is what you need to do. And you just need to be aware of the things that you need to do, and you can do these things yourself. You don't need, it doesn't rely on any special report or special advice or what have you. For me, all we did was we looked into this and spent many hours and hours talking to lots of securities lawyers and people, and figuring out, adding to the US domestic way of raising capital, there's extra things, of course, that you have to do are taken into account when you're international. And so you can work with your advisors in country. And that's another thing, when you're getting your advisors in Colombia or Uruguay or wherever you're working through, you say to them, hey, are you guys aware of all the things that we need to do to invest in the U.S., to raise capital in the U.S.? Are you familiar with the environment? Have you worked with a securities lawyer in the U.S.? Have you worked with a broker-dealer in the U.S.? And if you haven't, then either you guys will, go on that journey together, or you will find someone to help you go on that journey. A U.S. securities lawyer is always a good, is always a good way to go for not much money. You can, talk to them and get, little bits of advice up front, and that's another thing, when people are international fundraising, they don't like to spend money up front. They like to offer people raising capital, using finders and introducers. They want to offer commissions for successfully raising capital. But the reality is, in the US, that won't work. It doesn't work. You do have to outlay some money and resources, and it does take money to raise capital and access capital in the US. The truth is, a lot of the things, if you're that opposed to spending money with advisors and other people, yes, a lot of things you can do yourself. You can do the marketing, you can do the filing with the SEC, you can research and find broker dealers and people to work with and work through. All these things you can do yourself. All I would say is that you do need a U.S. securities lawyer, and you can do that in a very budgeted and controlled way. For them to guide you along the process, to help you find the right persons to work with. And as I say, of course, there are firms that will, charge you lots of money for finding investors and doing things. These are regulated companies, or they will market your offering if you're working with a regulated broker dealer and different things like that. But if you don't want to pay all this money up front to access or to find or to identify investors, when you don't want to work with consultants who know what they're doing and how to do all these things, and you want to do it yourself, then at the very least, you have to consult a U.S. securities lawyer and map out a way forward and how you're going to do all of these things. But really and truly, the bottom line is, though, if you don't, if you're not prepared to, deploy some capital in order to raise capital in the U.S., it's highly unlikely that you're going to be successful. Even crowdfunding, using a crowdfunding platform, you have to basically get you have to get capital together to be able even to market that offering properly. It requires a lot of work and diligence. So I'll stop there for now, and I'll continue in the next video. Cheers for now.